Methodist clergy. And there was never really a protest. Not a religious one anyway. If there was any kind of protest, Methodists came into being because of a political protest, the American Revolution. Though established after the Civil War, like I told the kids up here, Memorial Day also honors those who fought to bring the people of this land together as a nation. Oh, there were people in the colonies practicing the Wesley method in the early 18th century. I mean, one person organized meetings in Maryland and Virginia. Another one organized meetings in New York, and yet another person organized meetings in Philadelphia. John Wesley heard about this, and realizing the opportunity and the need, he sent several men, of course men, right, to the colonies to share the word. Our gospel lesson says Jesus appointed 72 people and said to them, "The harvest is plentiful." That was the colonies, "but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. Go on your way. I am sending you out like lions, like lambs in the midst of wolves." I'm getting ahead of myself. There was wolves in the wilderness. There were bears and bobcats and rattlesnakes. That's what they had to endure when they were sent out by John and Charles Wesley. About 1771, and there was maybe about 600 Methodists in the colony, a total of 600 Methodists in the colony. But there was no organization linking the several small groups, you know, the ones I mentioned in Maryland and Virginia and New York and Philadelphia. There was nothing to link them together as a group. But, there's always a but. I love the buts. There was dissent in the colonies. Something about taxation without representation. Remember Schoolhouse Rock? They even had the nerve to tax our cup of tea. And, you know, and the Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party and all that. Yep. The American Revolution was smoldering, and the colonists, they didn't like anything that was connected to Britain. Not a thing. So Methodists, along with Anglicans, those priests, they were forced to leave or go underground. Per J. Ellsworth Callis in Being United Methodist, John Wesley didn't help matters with his pamphlet called A Calm Address to Our American Colonies. It was based on Samuel Johnson's Taxation, No Tyranny. Now, Jen and I are leaving this week for annual conference. At the first Methodist conference, the Christmas conference of 1784, American Methodism formally organized. 1784. Now this is important. This is very democratic. John Wesley instructed them, he told them to name Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury as their superintendents. Asbury went, nope. He insisted that the conference elect them, not just accept Wesley's appointment. The conference went a step further, though. They decided to not appoint them as superintendents, elect them as superintendents, but as bishops. That's how we got, we were formerly known as a Methodist Episcopal Church. Episcopal means bishop, so they had bishops now. And Wesley was a little disappointed. Now, Coke had a call to share Christ with the world. He spent more time crossing the Atlantic back and forth than he did on land. Asbury, on the other hand, never stopped traveling this land, never pausing, seldom resting, to the detriment of his health. Now this, I think, is something to be proud of this Memorial Weekend. J. Ellsworth Callis, I love reading his books, says this: regardless of such an unpretentious and fumbling start, Methodism survived. This I love. Less than a month after George Washington's inauguration as the first president of the new United States of America, 4 earnest clergy made an official visit, the 2 bishops, Coke and Asbury, of the new Methodist Episcopal Church, and 2 of their leading clergy. These 4 Methodists were the first, hear that? Were the first religious delegation to recognize formally the new government and its president, and to offer blessing to the new nation and its officers. The smallest, the newest denomination is the first to answer the call before God to bring Christ to this new nation, the United States of America. Methodist clergy were now free to go where no clergy had gone before, into the new territories. Circuit riders and saddlebags, we talked about them a few weeks ago, reaching every part of the nation for God. Now, let's go back a little bit, back to before the revolution. I kind of jumped ahead, I got excited. You know, before Washington's inauguration. Remember, John Wesley sent several men to the colonies. And of those several men he sent, only 1 stayed in the United States, did not return to England. It was Francis Asbury. He remained in the colonies. John Wigger quoted Asbury as to say he stayed in the colonies because a good shepherd dared not leave his flock in time of danger. Therefore, I am determined by the grace of God not to leave them, let the consequences be what it may. He traveled, they estimate he traveled 130,000 miles. He crossed the Appalachians more than 60 times. Now remember, this is on horseback. He couldn't even take a buggy because the buggy couldn't get through. The frontier was the future, and the Methodist Church is going to be there. Now, as for wages, Methodist clergy only made about 20% of other denominational pastors. And they didn't always get that. They traveled hundreds of miles to serve all the churches in their circuit at least once a month. So once a month, they're traveling hundreds of miles to go from one small town, one small settlement to another small settlement so that they can reach all the people. And remember what they got in their saddlebags, right? A few weeks ago, they got books, not just the Bible, but other books for reading that they gave away and sold along the way. They helped educate this country. They braved the weather. They braved the wilderness, the loneliness, and the people who didn't always welcome them. The death rate was high. These men were dedicated to bringing God to this new nation. Romans 10:15 said, "And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news." In 1776, I kind of dated myself, 1776, less than 3% of people attending church in America were Methodist. 75 years later, in 1850, 34% of people attending church in America were Methodist. It became the largest religious body in the United States. The only thing, it was the biggest national institute other than the federal government. What was a movement of a simple theology of salvation and damnation in 1830, by 1870, had political influence. There was this guy, his name was Bishop Simpson. He was friends with President Lincoln, President Grant, and President Hayes. He urged the emancipation of slaves. Not that there's no proof that he had any influence, but he did say, he encouraged it. Now, by this time, we've already split. Our denomination, Methodism, Methodist Episcopal Church, has split over the issue of slavery, as did other denominations, the Baptists, the Presbyterians. But it was Bishop Simpson who offered a prayer at the White House service and proceeded over the funeral service of President Lincoln. The Methodist Church reached out to a wide audience. Ever hear of Lake Chautauqua? Lake Chautauqua? Yeah. It was originally in upstate New York. Oh, there had been camp meetings before, but this was a whole new idea. This was like summer camp for whole families. I know some friends that go to a place called Camp Simpson. I'm wondering if it's named after this Bishop Simpson. And families from my former church would all flock there. I'd never been there. Families came, they stayed, they enjoyed music, they enjoyed drama. They could hear educational and political leaders dedicated to religious faith. 9 U.S. presidents spoke there. Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered his I Hate War speech there. The United Methodist Church has founded more than 1,200 educational institutions, like Cokesbury College. There's 124 of those 1,200 that still remain and working. He founded the first women's college to offer bachelor's degrees to women. Methodists created the first standards for educational institutions. They created one of the oldest, if not the first, correspondence school for people who never went to high school or college. They could do it by mail. You've all heard of the Goodwill. Yes, it's now independent, but it was started by a Methodist minister during an economic depression in the 19th century. They operate in 169 cities in the United States. Makes you wonder what June's place can eventually be. Hospitals, homes for the aging, adoption programs, orphanages, rescue missions, study programs. The Methodist Church has been a part of all of that, been instrumental in all of that. Paul in Titus 3:1 said, "Be ready for every good work." And they were. John Wesley said, it's a long speech, I'm only going to do a little bit of it. Do all the good you can to all the people you can as long as ever you can. Early Methodists took these words to heart and became known as America's church. Our Old Testament reading today was one verse. This is how I'm going to end this. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am. Send me." Amen. It's time for our offering. Our invitation to the offering says, "And now, our God, we give thanks to you and praise your glorious name." It's from 1 Chronicles 29, verse 13.